Headed toward fall camp in Norman. Welcome to OU Sooners Live, our 70th edition. Here we got Jason Ray on the line. Of course, he is the guy that makes this work. You can catch his work at Last Word on College Football. And again, Oklahoma less than 1 week away from hitting the practice field. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Doing good. As you mentioned, we're about next Thursday, August 4th, is when fall camp officially opens for Oklahoma. So we're, like I said, like we say every week, we're getting closer and closer. But when fall camp starts, you really know it's right around the corner.
You used the term a few weeks ago, but it was basically in response to a term that was out there already, three-star fatigue concerning Oklahoma recruiting. But that has been much corrected here in the last month. It is pretty astounding to look at the commitment list in July going back to June 30th. If you look at the class 1 through 10 or 11, every commit aside from Jackson Arnold at the top of the class, the next 8, 9, 10 guys have all committed since June 30th. And of course, the most recent has been Derek LeBlanc, and he comes in from the state of Florida.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, I think this was a Florida Oklahoma battle for a while. You know, kind of listening to some of LeBlanc's comments afterwards, it seems like Oklahoma was really the team, had been the team for quite some time that he was leaning towards and had a much better relationship with from a Todd Bates perspective. I think he was the main recruiter for LeBlanc. So yeah, I think 6'5", 270, a guy that probably plays inside. I've seen this comparison a couple of times, very kind of reminiscent to an Isaiah Thomas that from Oklahoma over the last few years. So again, this is the first defensive lineman that Oklahoma has got, true defensive lineman. Now they've got they've got one edge in PJ Adebari, but a true inside guy. And I think that was, I don't know if I would say that was a concern, but I think there was a lot of folks just kind of wondering when the next defensive lineman commit would come. And so LeBlanc is that first one, as you mentioned, 4-star kid out of Kissimmee, Florida, number 12, 13 overall defensive lineman in the class. And I think he's just outside of the top 100 at 101, if I remember correctly. So yeah, like a huge get, and specifically someone that will probably be inside, probably one of the better inside guys out of high school that Oklahoma has got in the past few years. I think Perion Winfrey was a JUCO guy. He's probably the highest recruited, I guess, from a JUCO perspective. But out of high school, LeBlanc is probably the best prospect that Oklahoma has had in quite a few years.
Derek LeBlanc, as a junior in Kissimmee, Florida, had 12 tackles for loss, 38 tackles total, and racked up 8 sacks. That brings him to 17 career sacks in 3 seasons of high school football there. All right. That's, again, 8 to 9 to 10. I didn't do the exact count of commits, high-level commits coming into the program here just in the last month that has lifted this class to number 6 in the nation, according to 247 Sports. And it's pretty impressive what Brent Venables is doing. Do we have any other prospects out there that we're awaiting word on?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a big weekend, I think, recruiting wise, Mark. Maybe not necessarily from a commitment perspective, but there's a lot of Oklahoma has had a couple of events earlier in the week and then this weekend as well. So they're calling it. So there's one that's really kind of a party at the Palace that's really kind of starting today, and it's going to happen throughout the weekend. And then there was on the 27th, so a couple of days ago, there was a lot of 24 and 25 kids on campus. And so there's a small window here, Mark, of the dead period kind of lifting. So you've got, I think, from the 27th up until like maybe Wednesday or Thursday of next week. So recruits can come in for unofficials or officials or just come visit or whatever that looks like. So So I think some notable kids that Oklahoma would be people would be interested in. There's a fair amount of commitments in the 23 cycle that's already that's on campus, but I think the guy that everybody is kind of looking at here, DJ Hicks, is officially on campus for Oklahoma for this event. And it's really it's too early to tell. This is going to be a December one, right? This is going to be one that's going to go maybe even further than December. I think right now, given I mean, there's a long way to go, so people don't necessarily get too wrapped up. I think Oklahoma probably leads slightly for Hicks. It's really I think there's more people that are in the mix, but I think Oklahoma and Texas A&M right now are the two biggest players for him. And as I mentioned, he's a guy, in my opinion, I know he's number 6 overall, but I think he's the best player in the country overall, the best player. And so he's on campus. Another defensive lineman, Edric Hill, out of North Kansas City, Missouri, high school teammates with Caden Green, who is also obviously a commit for Oklahoma. Um, and this is a guy not really necessarily a pending decision for Edric Hill, but it'll come down, probably between Oklahoma and some of the other kind of SEC schools there as well. Alabama's in play. Um, Tasuli Akana, an edge, like one of the better edge players in the country. Number 6 overall. Overall edge player, top 70 overall in the state, in the country, I should say. He's a guy, Mark, that I feel very, very good about Oklahoma's chances. I think it's right now how things are going. I would say it's more of a matter of when and not necessarily if. This is a guy that Venables has really kind of sunk his teeth in, so to speak, early on, and a guy that he's really, really targeted as someone that he wants within this program. And then there's a couple of others. Jacoby Johnson is a local product out of Mustang, Oklahoma. He's here for this event, and again, he's a guy that I think they're just waiting on the trigger to be pulled, so to speak. I think he's a guy that's probably early to mid August will probably commit. Number 2 player overall in the state of Oklahoma, number 8 athlete from a 247 composite perspective. Probably looks like he will be more of a cornerback safety type at Oklahoma if he does choose to go to Oklahoma, but he's been a heavy lean to Oklahoma for quite some time, and I think that kind of takes a little bit of the edge off with maybe a little bit of a concern about how things are going in the state of Oklahoma in terms of recruiting. But I think he's a guy that again would be super surprised if he does not come to Oklahoma. Makari Vickers is another guy, safety out of Texas. He probably I think Oklahoma likes him a little bit more as a cornerback than a safety, but again, top 10 safety in the country overall for Oklahoma in this class. And he's going to announce his decision on August 26th. There's been some crystal balls headed towards Oklahoma's way over the last week, so it looks trending to Oklahoma. But this is there's probably Mark, there's probably 3 or 4 of these kids that are really between down to Oklahoma and Alabama from a defensive line perspective, and then a couple of safeties. So it'll be interesting to see, on the defensive side, how many of these battles Oklahoma wins. I think they are significantly ahead in this battle. So we'll see how that continues to trend. Jordan Raynaud is another 4-star defensive lineman out of Tyler, Texas. Again, this one is probably another Oklahoma and Alabama. This one's a little bit of a longer situation. I don't really expect him to make any kind of decision here, here in the near future. But again, I think with this one to watch out for, the longer it goes, the more positive it is for Oklahoma. I think if it's a commitment that he makes, I think early on in the fall here in August, or maybe even September, I think it's probably leans a little bit more towards Alabama. But if this lingers into October, November, then you have to like Oklahoma's chances a little bit more. And the last one that I'll mention here is Peyton Bowen. So we've talked about him, quite a bit out of the state of Texas, number 5 overall safety in the country, has been committed to Notre Dame for quite some time, and he's very. I don't know the right word. He is. I don't know if he plays the game a little bit, but he's very non-committal in terms of where he's going to visits, and so I think he had made a couple of different suggestions that he was going to be in Oklahoma, and then a couple of suggestions that no, he might actually be in Texas A&M this weekend. I heard earlier this morning that he's actually in Norman, actually in Oklahoma, so it's something that's been rumored as a potential flip for quite some time, and so that's something that I think is a big priority. I think obviously for Oklahoma, but again, a top 10 overall safety. That who knows? I mean, it's one of those things. I don't really have a big lean. I wouldn't say one way or the other right now. I think wouldn't it all be surprised to see that flip, because you see more and more conversation about that, more and more stuff that seems to point towards that happening. But I think overall, Mark, you kind of alluded to the number of commitments in July, and I think it's 9, by my count at this point. And Oklahoma was number 40, I think number 46 before the month of July started. And then, and where they're at here on July 29th, jumping up all the way to number 6 is, I mean, it's, you hate to use the big words like astonishing and things like that, but I think it's certainly very, very impressive what the staff has been able to do. And mind you, and this is a staff that has not, as a staff, has not coached one, specifically on the defensive side, one game at the University of Oklahoma, and specifically Venables. And so I think, depending on how this season goes, especially early on, they're stockpiling a lot of this talent, especially specifically on the defensive side of the ball. And if they have if they have a solid season, and if they show continued improvement on the defensive side of the ball, I think this is a staff that's going to continue to recruit at a very high level.
We knew that Oklahoma was not going to bring in the 46th ranked class in the country, but still at the same time, it's not just about the ranking at that point. It's about how many players that are potential Oklahoma Sooners are being snatched up by other teams. And not that there's not a possibility of a flip, but most likely when a player goes off the board, he goes off the board. I would think that's 80% of the time that the commitment holds and the player is off the board. So it was not difficult to envision maybe players were not necessarily on the offensive side of the ball going to be attracted to Brent Venables because that's not where his cachet is. Or there are a number of reasons to think that maybe Oklahoma, at least for 1 year, if not throughout the Brent Venables tenure, would take a step back in recruiting. But here we are a month later, and that's not necessarily the case. The interesting dynamic that you bring up with the Alabama-Oklahoma battles is that unless there was a particular relationship that was built or the player hailed from, let's say, Texas or Oklahoma, of course, that there was a geographic tie in that you would give the recruiting advantage to Alabama substantially in the past because of obviously just churning out better defenses. And then also because of that, more NFL players on that side of the ball and at that position. However, now we've got a new dynamic with Alabama still has all that, but Brent Venables can say, look at what I've done, and now I'm bringing that to Oklahoma. So I develop NFL players, I churn out NFL players, and you're going to play for a much improved defense, and we're going to turn this into a top-level defense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the star power, so to speak, that this staff has. And when you look at all 3 levels of the defense, you've got coaches that have, to your point, Mark, consistently put players to the next level, continue to have very, very high producing teams and individuals. When you look at the defensive line, Todd Bates, and even an off-field role, but to a certain degree, Miguel Chavis as well at Clemson, right? Then you obviously Venables and his linebacker coaching, speaks for itself on, the type of linebackers that he's had throughout his career. And then even on the defensive backfield, you got Jay Valai, and I think really to your point, Mark, about some of those Alabama discussions, I think Makari Vickers' relationship with Jay Valai, even previously with last year with being at Alabama, um, has made it very fruitful for him coming over to Oklahoma. So you've got elite recruiters at all different areas, so to speak, of the defense that will, that have that certain respect among the athletes in the country. So I think that lends it to itself. And then like I said, as long as that continues to show up on the field, which I mean, you have no you have no reason to believe that it won't. But I think if that continues to progress on the field, I think this team has the opportunity to begin recruiting, at a more elite level defensively. And just the one thing that I had heard from a source of mine that really knows recruiting said, if some of these things fall into place like they really think they will, some of these other kids like a Vickers, like a Kana, like a DJ Hicks, obviously. This could be the best defensive class Oklahoma has had since Switzer. So that's 30 plus years of where Oklahoma may sit come the 2023 early signing period. So that's I mean, that's good company, obviously great company, and it shows Oklahoma, even if they lose some of these battles, they're in some of these battles with elite prospects that maybe they haven't necessarily been in quite some time.
Folks, check out Jason's post from the other day. He went live a couple days ago and answered your questions and comments concerning Oklahoma recruiting. It's got about 2,500 views, did very well. A lot of interaction there. But if you have yet to see it or missed some of it, please check it out. Also, keep in mind that we've got a Discord here at the Voice of College Football. So what you need to do is go to Patreon, search Mark Rogers TV, sign up there, and I will welcome you with open arms with a little welcome letter, Discord link that will prompt you right into the Discord, which is basically, if you've not heard of Discord, which I was one of you about 7 or 8 months ago, it is just a chat that runs all the time. So you can jump in there at any time and talk college football. We've got about 60 plus in our Discord. We would love that to be 100, 200, 1,000 and beyond. And you can bring your Oklahoma college football talk or college football discussion across the board. Again, Patreon, search Mark Rogers TV. I will get you the Discord link, and there are so many other benefits to Patreon as well that we will not go into right here. We have broken down position by position. Jason, of course, taking the lead. We've run through the offense. We started with the defense last week. Check out the polls that we posted on the community page in regards to various questions concerning that particular position as we head toward the linebackers. Deshaun White comes into 2022 with 169 career tackles as a 3-year starter, Jason. And in many ways, you would have to think that he's kind of the heart of the defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, he's been a little bit overshadowed by different linebackers that Oklahoma has had over the last few years. You look at Kenneth Murray, you look at Brian Asamoah. But to your point, he is a 3-year starter, and he has been a very productive player for Oklahoma. Probably not where they need quite what they need out of him. And he was a kid, Mark, that was very, very heavily leaning towards, looking at going to the next level and starting his professional career. But he wanted to, at the end of the day, he wanted to have the opportunity to play under Brent, and just play under, obviously a very elite linebacker coach. And so he has, I think, he has the opportunity to make that next step and just to be a very consistent very consistent player for Oklahoma. And so when you look at this, Mark, this linebacker group as a whole, I think you have a level of trust certainly that Venables is going to get these guys playing at their peak, right? At the level that they need to be playing at. But I think it's also a group that is probably has the lowest amount of depth on the defensive side of the ball. So Oklahoma can't afford a lot of injuries at this linebacker position. And so since you mentioned Deshaun White, we can start with a middle linebacker. So you've got Deshaun White, who is there's not really much of a battle for me on the middle linebacker spot. I think he's the guy that will be that middle linebacker. I think that one of the interesting guys here is TD Roof. When you look at him, son of head coach, our defensive coordinator, Ted Roof, has moved along, quite a bit as Ted has through his career. With that, was at Appalachian State last year, and he's a guy, Mark, that I think he knows that. I mean, as you would expect, but he knows the defense in and out. Like he knows it very, very well. But he's probably doesn't have the same athletic ability as some of the other linebackers on campus. So I mean, he'll play. I think he's your backup right now in the middle, and he'll play a lot. Just his ability to know where to be will make up for a little bit of that lack of athleticism. So and then you got a couple of I think you got a couple of younger guys. Well, one older guy that really hasn't seen the field a lot, Joseph Wette, just hasn't necessarily put it all together. So he'll be probably he'll be third or fourth team, at that middle linebacker. And then you've got Kobe McKenzie, who's a true freshman, very highly touted and highly regarded linebacker within this 2022 cycle. As we've talked about, typically Venables doesn't like to play freshmen as much, but I think he's a kid that has the body, but it's just kind of getting him up to speed and learning that. So I think he's a guy that you probably see play four games in redshirt this year. But certainly he could end up being much better than anticipated, and certainly could crack his way into that two deep, so to speak. And then you move to the weak side. You've got this one's a little bit more of a competitive battle. I think going into the season, you like Danny Stutzman as your as your starting weak side linebacker. Played really, really well towards the end of the season. Got to play in that because of opt outs. Was it Brian Asamoah specifically was able to get a start. Played well. Had 8 tackles and a sack in that game, and so he battled a little bit of an elbow issue, throughout the year, and then certainly your typical freshman learning curves. But he's a guy that I think that has your great typical linebacker mentality. Has excellent speed. Just kind of knows where to be, and so even though there's a battle there, I think he's the guy that is your likely starter there. I think the one guy, and it'll be interesting to see, Mark, where he gets placed in this defense is Jaren Kinnick. So he's a true freshman. I think most people kind of remember the story. He was committed to Clemson. He decided that he didn't necessarily want to be at Clemson with that move from Venables from Clemson to Oklahoma, and then essentially followed Venables. He wasn't willing at the time to offer him a scholarship because he didn't want to really kind of pluck players from Dabo, but wanted to be at Oklahoma, wanted to be with Brent and the staff so bad that he initially walked on, and then after conversations with Dabo, they obviously ended up giving him a scholarship. heard great things, like really, really good things about him so far in the summer. Was here in the spring, so got that opportunity to kind of learn. As I mentioned, Venables doesn't like to play a lot of freshmen. I think this is a guy that's probably a little bit different. I think he'll play some. Where that ends up being, I'm not sure. Probably your weak side linebacker, but it could also be in that little hybrid linebacker, nickelback, cheetah position that Venables likes to employ. So look for him to play a lot. Very interested to see. I mean, for people to kind of watch him on how he progresses through the fall and how he plays here. So a couple other guys to keep your mind on. David Agwebu has really kind of changed his body and changed. He's played a decent amount for Oklahoma over the last couple of years. Again, just looking for much more consistency, much more consistent play out of him this year, and he'll certainly be in the mix. I would say, kind of depending on what happens with Mechanic and whether they move him to more of the cheetah position. I think Agwebu probably is right there for a battle on the backup spot. And then you got Shane Witter, who's a guy that's probably the fastest linebacker on the team, probably the most athletic linebacker on the team, but he's not had that consistency in being able to kind of put that all together. So you've got, Mark, within those four, you've got four really good, honestly, really talented linebackers that have an opportunity in it to play, and it'll be interesting to see how that battle really kind of manifests itself through fall camp. And then we kind of talked about this a little bit on the defensive line, but it's more of a linebacker position when you look at the edge guys. So I think right now you're probably going into it. Your clear starter is going to be Marcus Stripling. Had a really, really good spring, maybe the best defensive player on the field in the spring game, and then played really well towards the end of the season, specifically against Oregon in the bowl game. And so he's kind of really just transferred that over from where he's at in the summer compared to where he was at last year. So but I think the wild card here is Clayton Smith. Does he have the ability to put it together? I think he's your backup at the edge right now going into fall camp, but the athleticism, I think he probably has a higher ceiling than what Marcus Stripling has. But again, with when you look at the experience, Marcus Stripling's a senior, Clayton Smith is just a redshirt freshman. So I think he'll see the field. I think he has elite athleticism to bring to that position. So it'll be again interesting to follow him during camp to see how he keeps progressing and he learns the defense and if he's in a position to help Oklahoma as much as I think a lot of us think and hope that he can.
We talk Oklahoma football with all of you each and every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. where it counts. Please bring your comments and questions. As always, we will dive through them right now. Previewing the linebackers today, we have marched through the offense, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, and the D-line last week. We will get to our poll in just a minute to see what the results were at this point, considering the impact players along the defensive front. But just to wrap up the linebacking discussion, Jason, unless somebody flashes that is not expected or something happens in regards to getting ravaged with injuries, but reasonably thinking, how good do you think that the linebacking core should be?
I think, when you look at what they lost last year, Brian Asamoah was absolutely the most complete linebacker that Oklahoma had on this team. So that's a big loss. Trying to figure out how to replace his his productivity from last year. But I think when you look at this linebacking group, I think it's probably the biggest key to the overall defense. I think Oklahoma is a lot more deep at the defensive line and in the secondary than they are in the linebacking group. But I think there's just an element of trust that you have to have. I think as an OU fan, as an OU supporter watching this team, there's an element of trust that you have to have with what Brent Venables is going to do. Obviously, he's not certainly not a miracle worker, and Oklahoma's not in a terrible position in terms of productivity. I think just what has been missing, throughout the last few years is consistency. I mean, you'll have a lot of these guys that have flashed, right? You've got Agwebu who has flashed and made good plays, but the consistency is not there. You've got Deshaun White, who's he's a 3-year starter, as we mentioned, but he has not always been as consistent as he needs to be. So I think if this coaching staff can get the needed consistency that they need out of this group, I think it can be a much improved group. But getting that consistency, I think, is the key. So because the talent, I think, is there at all levels of the linebacking group. So I think it's just a matter of if they're able to continue to get that consistency, and where they're at. And it's going to take some time. Like I think people, and I when you look at this, and people I've talked to, I think a lot of people just kind of assume that Oklahoma is going to have with what's going on in terms of a coaching staff, that they're going to have a really good defense. And don't be surprised a little bit if it's a bit of a struggle early on, and um, no specific knock on the coaching staff or any of these kids or anything, but it'll take a little bit just to kind of get, because you'll see some busts from time to time in terms of just how big the playbook is compared to, and how multiple they're going to be on defense compared to that. But I think once you get through those first couple of games and get some of the and get and iron some of that out, I think this group has a potential, specifically in the linebacker group, but help this team be a top 25-30 defense overall.
Our guy John Sarian's asking about the recruiting approach of Brent Venables versus Lincoln Riley. What do you think the differences are?
I mean, it couldn't be more different, Mark. I mean, I think just in general, I think when you look at what Riley's recruiting process was, it was, I don't want to say it was high pressure, but I think from a recruiting perspective, they looked to get a lot of commitments early. They looked to and like I said, I don't know that it's necessarily pressure, but I think they were confident. I think that the approach was, Riley and team was confident that this was going to be the spot that they wanted to go. And hey, if you want to go take other visits, go take other visits, but we anticipate that this is going to be the place that you want to go. Whereas Venables has really been the opposite. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think you instill that in these kids that Oklahoma is the place where you want to be, but he's enticed these kids not to make commitments, early on. Take your visits, enjoy the process, and hey, come back to us if Oklahoma's the place that you really want to be. And at that point, his expectations is, you're done. We're not playing the game anymore. Once you commit to Oklahoma, no more visits. And so I think that's been different. And as you see, I know this was kind of made its way through the um, through the Oklahoma circle the last couple of days, that USC quarterback Malachi Nelson, who obviously was committed to Oklahoma, now committed to USC, is visiting Texas A&M this weekend. And so you see some of those kids, obviously Riley's a tremendous recruiter. But I think you in terms of the approach, you've seen with Riley a decent amount of decommits later in the cycle, where the hope and the approach that Venables has taken at Clemson here has been successful, where there's been very, very few decommits. And so we'll see how that kind of translates this year for Oklahoma. But I think those are the two biggest, I think, differences in terms of approach. And I think what's happening from everything that I understand, I think there's a lot of broken promises, I think, that happen, and I'm sure that happens in recruiting all the time. But I think it seems to have happened a little bit more from the Riley perspective than it has with Venables and staff. So we'll see how that continues to progress. But there's a lot of noise out of the USC camp that not only some of these kids that have committed, for the 2023-24 cycle, but even a couple of current kids on campus that, maybe what they were promised to come to USC isn't exactly what the reality is.
We will post a linebacking poll, and please take part in that. We appreciate everybody who has taken part in our previous polls, and I think the last one we posted was actually the most popular. And let's check it out here. Along the defensive front, Jason asked, who will be the most productive linebacker for Oklahoma this season? Make sure I've got it on the screen. I've got to look at two different screens at the same time. There we go. Danny Stutzman with a pretty good lead there. Is that surprising with oh, okay. That's the one that was just posted. So Jason just got that one out for the linebackers. I was going to go back to the defensive front, but early returns here for the linebacking position with Danny Stutzman at 53% with 60 votes in. And then going back a week, here's the defensive line question. Who will be Oklahoma's best defensive lineman in 2022? 900 votes in. And Jalen Redmond is our leader at 45%, Jason.
Yeah, that's not surprising in the least. Specifically, the number one and number two guy. I think for Oklahoma to be where they want to be on the defensive lineman, Jalen Redmond needs to be either one of or their best and most productive defensive lineman this year. So I think that lays out perfectly. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Ethan Downs ends up being the best defensive lineman, but 1-2 or 2-1 there. I think that's what you would like to see, and what you assume this will look like coming in for Oklahoma on the defensive line this year.
And then again, just posted prior to the show here, our linebacking question about who will be the most productive linebacker for the Sooners in 2022. And Danny Stutzman out to a big lead early with about 60 votes. Do you anticipate that staying in that range?
Yeah, I would think so. I think coming in, you look at, and I think there's a little bit of I don't know if it's fatigue around Deshaun White or not, but him, as you see, it's really close between him, Agwebu, and I think Stripling was the other one that was right there in the low double digits. But yeah, I think that's what you would expect. I think everything that I've heard out of summer and even the spring was that Stutzman is the best linebacker on this team as of right now, and we'll see how that continues to go. And I think the one thing that for me is going to be very interesting is they've released some of these these weight gains, weight losses, and changes. I think it's going to be interesting just to see what a summer under Jerry Schmidt has done for some of these kids on this team, and how that kind of manifests itself coming into the fall camp. But no, I think certainly I would expect, from what I've heard, that Stutzman probably is your leader in the clubhouse all the way around on who will be the most productive linebacker this season.
If I'm counting correctly, we will have either 4, maybe 5, but probably 4 more shows before the opener. I'd have to look at a calendar. I think next Friday. So you said that August camp opens next Thursday, the 4th. So next Friday would be the 5th, the 12th, the 19th, the 26th, and then the day before. So I guess we've got 5 more shows. So we will continue, of course, with our position previews, everyone. And then as we get close to the season, deliver our Big 12 and national predictions here. And anything else that you would like to see us review and delve into, please leave a request to the page here. There's a few comments coming in about Bray Walker. So not only a very highly touted player coming out of high school, but now he's reached a point in which I can't speak to this as much as what I'm seeing here, but I would even say that some of the previews and correct me if I'm wrong, based on what you've set up for the offensive line, that he hasn't been a guy that's been talked about as much as you would expect at this point in his career.
Yeah, no, he's a guy, Mark. As you mentioned, we've talked about him quite a bit, and I think there's a little bit more. There's always a little bit more of a, I guess, a stake in the game, so to speak, for the local Oklahoma product. So he's a guy that came in very, very highly recruited, a guy that a lot of people thought had a chance to compete and play right away. And not only has he not done that, but he really hasn't seen the field at all in any significant manner for Oklahoma throughout his career. And the comment here is spot on. They did a early on in the summer camp. They did a couple of different strength tests, and Bray Walker consistently grades out as the strongest offensive lineman on this team, bar none. So I think he's a little bit heavy-footed. I think that's one thing that's caused him some problems, early on and throughout his career. And I think um, the scheme has caused a little bit of a struggle as well. So I think the simplistic view of what this offensive line and the scheme and everything under Jeff Lebby will bring to the table, I think will be interesting for him. Does he have the opportunity? I think he certainly has the opportunity to get into the two deep. I don't know. Um, I think it would be a lot to ask for him, to elevate himself from where he's been traditionally, and then certainly in the spring to a starting lineup role for Oklahoma this year. But he's definitely going to be in a battle for that two deep. And I've mentioned this a few times, but I think it certainly, for me, it bears repeating that I think just holistically there's concern, I think, among the Sooner fans related to Oklahoma's, how they have produced on the offensive line over the last couple of years compared to where they were, 2017, 2018, 2019. And so I think it's never as bad as it seems. I think when you set the bar as high as these 2017, 2018, 2019 teams have. Remember, this 2018 team offensive line, every single one of them are in the NFL. All five starters are in the NFL, and that's rare. And so that's not something that happens all the time. So I think asking an offensive lineman to produce at that level is a little bit unfair, but I think at the same time most people understand that the production isn't necessarily where it needs to be. And so you bring Jeff Lebby into the fold, who is an offensive lineman by nature and by trade. And so I think he understands offensive line play at a bigger and a higher level than Lincoln Riley did, just for the fact that he played the position and he knows it. So I think when you have two on-field offensive line coaches, with Bedenbaugh and certainly with Levy there, I think you have to assume that this offensive line is going to get better this year. And I think they've done a really good job of really kind of changing their body style and overall through the summer. So I think we'll see how that kind of shows itself on the field. But will be interesting to see. I think we'll see a fairly significant improvement over that unit from where they were last year to this year.
A few recent comments in the chat is stirring up some national championship talk. So I'm not laughing at the prospects of competing for a national championship. It's possible. The way things shake out, and based on most people's logical, reasonable projections, this isn't quite the team yet. But I think they're one of the 10 or 12 best teams in the country, probably in that range. So if a lot of things happen right and it becomes a much different team in December than it was in September, it's possible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're right, Mark. I mean, anything's. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think coming into the season, this is a team that's not going to be predicted to obviously win a national championship or probably even be a playoff team, right? I mean, there's a lot of predictions where Oklahoma's not even predicted to win the Big 12 championship this year. So it's a very different position than Oklahoma has been in quite some time. So I think the one thing that probably gives people maybe more optimism than you've seen in the past is traditionally over the last 10, 15 years, Oklahoma seems to have played best when they're in a little bit of an underdog role, a little bit of a maybe internally feeling slighted role than they have as one of the overwhelming favorites. Or I mean, look back to last year where they were, and then some of these seasons where they've been preseason number one or top two or three, and it's ended up being not as good as of a season as you would anticipate. So I think there's certainly something to that, and I think anytime you win or play for a national championship, you have to have an element of luck on your side, right? You have to when you think about that, from an injury perspective, are you able to stay healthy throughout the season? If you are you from a scheduling perspective, do you have the right schedule? And a lot of your tougher games are at home, and and I think more often than not, how do you play in those games that you're not really at your best? Things are against you. You're on the road or even at home, but more specifically, you're on the road. You're not playing well. The other team is playing, maybe a little bit better than their schedule, than their record indicates. And, how are you able to find ways to win? I mean, for everything that went on last year for Oklahoma, they found ways to win. And, you know, a lot of these games that they never really played well in. So, that's one thing that's, part of the consideration. I was asked this on Monday, but I think y- it's just so bizarre because I've seen, national people pick this team anywhere from 8-4 to 11-1, right? So I think the schedule sets up in a very positive way for Oklahoma, with really with Nebraska being the swing game, I think one way or the other. But I think with hosting Baylor, hosting Oklahoma State, Red River, obviously in Dallas where it always is. You have that schedule that gives you optimism that this could, if things go the right way, I think it could be a team that has a chance to make the playoff. I'll just say that and not go any further. Has a team that has an opportunity to make the playoffs.
I am making my way through the AP rankings year by year. So let me look at one more here. And I'm right there with what you had said initially about Oklahoma. I think, especially under Bob Stoops, having a tendency to take those lesser regarded teams that may have started preseason 12 to 15, somewhere in that range, and push for a BCS championship game in that era or a playoff bid. And then we've seen, whether it was injury related or just not meeting expectations, teams that were supposed to contend seriously for a national championship drop back with 3 or 4 losses. And that happened a couple times. Um, let's see. I am going to stop at 2014. I've made it through as many seasons as I can. The recent numbers have been fairly on point. So in 2021, preseason number 2, finished number 10. Now you can always land in a particular spot in a few different ways. You could either be in serious contention and then drop maybe a last game of the season in a bowl game and you finish 12th in the country. But on the third weekend in November, you were competing for a playoff spot, or you can make a push that you never really had a shot at the playoff, but you had a really strong finish. You go 11-2 and you finish number 6 in the country. But started number 2 last year, finished number 10 in the AP poll. Year before, 2020, COVID season, number 5 preseason, finished 6. 2019, of course, made the playoff preseason number 4, and because of the playoff appearance and performance, finished number 7. 2018, of course, was a playoff season, number 7 preseason, finished number 4. 2017, of course, was the loss in the Rose Bowl in the playoff, started number 7, finished number 3. 2016 would have been 2 quick losses to Houston and Ohio State, and then went on a run, won the Sugar Bowl, started number 3, finished number 5. It was the 2015 team that eventually made the playoff that started preseason number 19, finished number 5. And then that 2014 team was preseason number 4, coming off the Sugar Bowl win against Alabama that lost to Clemson in the Russell Athletic Bowl, I believe, to finish 8-5 and unranked. So,
yeah, I mean, I think people want to. I think to your point, I think the 2015 team draw parallels maybe to that team, right? That started so so low, and Oklahoma's not going to start. I mean, they're not going to be that low. They're probably, when you, as we have talked about this a lot, the preseason polls are probably there. I mean, they're for people to just talk about. Obviously, but I think a lot of it goes on reputation as well. So I think you probably have Oklahoma probably towards the tail end of that top 10, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that area. But yeah, I mean, you draw parallels to that, but you never know. I mean, who would have? I think there's not very many of us that would have pegged Michigan to be in the playoffs last year. So there's traditionally not been a ton of surprises, right? But I think there's, with Cincinnati and Michigan being 2 of the participants last year, not a whole lot of people thought that would happen, but certainly it did. So you never know. In terms of what teams will do and how well they get better throughout the season, or what kind of breaks they're able to get.
yeah, it's a good point about Michigan, because you would consider Oklahoma and Michigan to have comparable talent based on the recruiting rankings. But if anything, Oklahoma would be better based on the recruiting rankings, slightly better each season, more in that 6 to 9 range rather than Michigan, maybe 7 to 13 range. If you look past over the last 3 to 5 seasons, something in that range. But so similarly, talented teams, but Michigan has what's considered one of the 2 or 3 best rosters in its way in Ohio State. Oklahoma doesn't have that. Michigan got past that, beat them by 2 touchdowns to obviously serve as the pinnacle of the season to get them to the playoff. And even a Penn State team that didn't do well, 7-6, but from a talent standpoint, is recruiting in that 6 to 10 range as well to get past. So it's, without a giant in the conference, Baylor and Oklahoma State are certainly formidable, and Texas is a wild card. Who knows what's possible? Now, when you talk to national championship, as we've discussed many times on here, there's a complete difference between making the playoff and winning a national championship. That's just a gigantic next step.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Yeah, when you look at the Big 12, it's interesting. I think, and we'll get into this when we do our Big 12 predictions, but I think the Big 12 is more. There's more parity and it's more wide open. I think than it's ever been. Maybe, but maybe if not ever in quite some time. Right. I'm very, very high on Kansas State. I think Kansas State has an opportunity to be a potential 8-9 win team this year. Oklahoma State certainly loses a ton in the back end of their defense, but their defensive line is still going to be really, really solid. And then, you look at Baylor. I think there's some concerns at wide receiver, but defensively they're going to be really, really good. And you got to think that Blake Shapen is going to be maybe even better than Bohannon was last year. And the fact that he won the job in the spring. And then you look at Texas. I mean, obviously the talent is off the charts, but are they able to put it together? And so yeah, there's a lot to like about the Big 12 just from a parity perspective, up and down. So even though the schedule is beneficial, obviously for Oklahoma, I think there's some areas within that schedule that certainly causes for concern.
The Nebraska game obviously doesn't impact the conference championship, but it very much impacts the playoff bid and also an intangible in regards to confidence and all of that leading into the Big 12 play. And it was cited a number of times in the chat, and maybe most notably by somebody who called it kind of a nervous game. And I get that. That should be a win. However, it's on the road, and Nebraska is a serious, put them in the Texas camp in a different way, a serious wild card if you put all the components together of how good they should be versus what the record was last year.
Yeah, no, you're right. I want to believe that Nebraska will be a good team. So much. I'm not rooting for them, so to speak, but you all obviously you feel a little bit bad for a team that lost that many close games last year. And the schedule for them, I don't know how they don't get to 6 wins. Like, honestly, Mark. I mean, um, you know, they, I mean, they may even get to 6 wins before November. But I don't know that. I don't know how much better of a team they're going to be, but I think you get to 6 wins just based on your schedule. I mean, you obviously the first game against Northwestern's maybe a little bit tricky, but you should win that, and you should at worst, um, be 3-1 after the Oklahoma game, and then you host Indiana and go to Rutgers. So you have to think you're probably at 5 wins there, and then you've got and the back half is pretty tough, right? I mean, the back half is tough. So I think you still should beat Illinois at home, and then that should get you to 6 wins. But you look at their talent, Mark, from a recruiting perspective, it's just not the same. When how well or lack thereof that they've recruited under Frost, or even after the last few years, it's not anywhere near at the level I think that their fans expect them to be. So I don't think they have um, an incredible amount of talent on that team, but I think they're probably good enough to get to 6 wins.
Big Ten Media Days were this week, and Trev Alberts, the Nebraska AD, was asked how many wins it would take to keep Scott Frost. Of course, he didn't answer that question, but I got to think that if they have another losing season, he's gone. And I got to think 8-4 and he's safe, and 6-6 and 7-5 are on the bubble. And a lot of evaluations going to have to be made on how many injuries did we have, how close and competitive were we against the good teams, and all of that. But I think 6-6, 7-5 is on the fence. And otherwise, Scott Frost secures his job or loses his job otherwise. But I know it's not a Nebraska show, but they had a similar week 0 game against Illinois last year, in which they were an 8 or 10 point favorite. and they blew that game. And Northwestern is not a talented football team, and they beat them by 7 touchdowns last year. Their one Big Ten win, but I wouldn't put it past Pat Fitzgerald for this to be like some kind of 17-13 game in the fourth quarter with Northwestern with a chance to win the game.
Yep. No, I agree with you, and like I mean, we'll get into Big 12 and national predictions, but I don't think this team is. I'm not going to say close, but I don't. They're not national championship caliber, at least right now. Looking at they could, they could surprise me coming in, but I don't think that this team is national championship caliber right now. I think they could, within a couple of years, absolutely. Next year, maybe the year after, absolutely realistic chances. But I haven't completely made my predictions, but I kind of leaning, and there's a lot for me. There's a lot to like about Ohio State this year, and I know that is music to your ears, Mark. But I think this, and I know we're about out of time here, but I think the talent is there. Offensively, I don't see anybody that's going to even come close to touching them. And when you think of this team offensively, they have very arguably the number one quarterback, the number one running back, and the number one wide receiver in the country, all all on one team. And yeah, maybe they're a little bit inexperienced at the wide receiver position outside of Jackson and Jigba, but besides that, I mean, running back, they're loaded. CJ Stroud will have a good season, I think. But I think for me, more than anything, listening to them at Big Ten Media Day, you can see and you can sense the motivation and the anger that team still has inside of them from from what happened last year. So I think defensively they weren't quite as good as they needed to be, but I think Jim Knowles coming over really helps them. And I mean, we'll see how it goes, but right now I kind of lean towards them as being at least number one right now, and probably see how it goes, but maybe your national champion here in 2022.
Yeah, my quick synopsis on what happened last year at Michigan is that Michigan, of course, needs to be given full credit for winning, and not just winning by a last-second field goal, winning in, I don't want to call it dominant fashion. It was a one-score game with about a minute left in the game. They tacked on a touchdown to make it a 42-27 game, but it was a convincing win. It was a convincing win, and they pushed Ohio State all over the field. So there are all sorts of, whether you want to call them excuses, or if they're valid, or if they're true, reasons why Ohio State may have gotten pushed all over the field, like the rampant flu running through the team that week, so forth and so on. Who
Right.
knows? It doesn't matter. They showed up for the game. They got whipped. But yeah, anything can happen in a one-game scenario. But man, that team's loaded on offense, as you just outlined, and they've got a top 3 or 4 offensive line, and even the guys that complement Smith and Jigba are top-level guys. Shoot, Marvin Harrison's son played in the Rose Bowl because of the 2 opt-outs and scored 3 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're loaded, and the defense certainly has the talent to be top-notch. They're just going to have to make it work with Jim Knowles, and so we shall see.
Well, no. The good thing is, I mean, maybe not the good thing, but I think from a fan's perspective, you're going to know super early. That's a big time opening game that they have with Notre Dame. So,
absolutely, folks, come on back next Friday and bring a friend or two and join the discussion here. Before you leave, please hit the like button, and you can always wait and watch what you missed as well if you joined us late. The video will be right here for you to enjoy what you missed right here at the Voice of College Football. Jason Ray, last word on college football. Head on over to the site as you see listed there on the banner. Check out Jason and everyone else's work there. Anything in particular there that you'd like to highlight?
We're getting ready to, obviously kind of start our fall camp previews and stuff like that. And then we have probably either this next week, I think at some point, where we'll start to unveil our staff preseason Heisman projections and rankings and stuff like that. So it'll be, a lot of good stuff going on here. Most teams get ready to kick off camp next week.
And one more time, we've got a Discord. If you go to MarkRogersTV on Patreon, so go to patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV, sign up for the Discord, and it's much more than just that, but that's what we're featuring here. You can talk college football all the time, 24/7, 365 with other college football fans. Jason, appreciate it. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next week.
All right. Thanks. You do the same, Mark.